Now we're done with controlled and uncontrolled airspace. It might be a good time for you to take a break if you've been watching these videos back to back. The next thing is now we're done with controlled and uncontrolled airspace. Now it gets a little easier here. There's no Class E, busy, and all that stuff. This is more cut and dry, and here's the different definitions, and here's the different types of airspace. The special use airspace is established for the purpose of separating civilian traffic with special government activity. Now, when you hear special government activity, it's probably something you want to stay away from. Now, usually manned aircraft and unmanned aircraft are not allowed or discouraged to enter any of these special use airspace areas. Here's the list: prohibited, restricted, warning, military operating areas, alert areas, and control firing areas. Let's go ahead and talk about each of them individually. The first one is the prohibited area. This is established for security reasons, and you are not allowed to fly in there. Obviously, it's prohibited. Prohibited means just don't go in there. These are going to be depicted on the chart with the letter P, P for prohibited, and there's no flying in there. And here's an example of one of them around the DC area. There's two of them. There's a prohibited area at the bottom here, and there's another one. You see P56, and at the bottom is P73. These, when you look at the sectional chart, on the top part of the sectional chart, and I'll show this to you in the chart section, there's going to be a table, just like what I'm showing you right here on the screen, that's going to have the number on the side. So see P73, for example, and it's going to tell you the altitude at which the airspace is located, to but not including 1,500 feet. It means that that airspace starts at the surface and goes all the way to 1,499 feet. Time of use, continuous. It's always on. There's no controlling agency in this case. It's just an area that you need to avoid. You cannot request approval to fly into that area. The next one is called a restricted area. The restricted area is very much like a prohibited area. You can't go in there. The operation is going to be dangerous for you as a non-participating aircraft. There's going to be firing of guns, there's going to be aerial combat, there's going to be guided missiles in there. Definitely not a place where you want to be flying your drone. These, compared to the prohibited areas, can be active or inactive based on the hours of operation. They can also be turned on by a NOTAM. Remember the NOTAM, Notice to Airmen, that long list of things that can be activated using that. So you have to pay attention. You always want to contact the controlling agency before you fly in a restricted area. I used to fly pretty close to Cape Canaveral when the shuttle program was pretty active. And at that point, we had restricted areas all around Cape Canaveral. Some of them were on all the time. Some of them were only on when there was activity in that area. So you could fly in that area sometimes, and sometimes you just couldn't. So you had to always check to make sure. They're going to be depicted on the chart using the letter R, R for restricted. And here's an example. This is actually Cape Canaveral right here. You can see that blue dashed kind of a line right here, or hairline, I guess you can call it. That's going to be our restricted area. Again, we can look on the side of the sectional chart and we can see the restricted number and we can see what altitude they go to. And then we can also see the time of use that they're going to be, the time of use they're going to be turned on and who's controlling them. Now you notice for all of these, they're controlled by Miami Center. Miami Center, you're going to find the frequency for Miami Center if you need to contact them, or the phone number, and then tell them, hey, I want to fly in that area. Is it active? And then they'll tell you, or they won't. Or you can go and take a look at the NOTAMs and see if the NOTAMs are telling you that these areas are turned on at that time. There, if you don't have to operate in there, just stay away, go somewhere else. I can tell you as a trainer, as a flight instructor, I'd rather not see any kind of drone activity in an area that has a high volume of pilot training. These are going to be depicted on the chart with the letter A for alert, and you see them right here. Again, it's that hairline design, and it's got that red color, just like the military operating area. Now you see this one, it says concentrating student jet transition training. So let's take a look at this one specifically from the sectional chart. 500 feet AGL to 6,500 feet AGL, continuous, and that's going to be controlled by Luke approach from Luke Air Force Base 118.5. The last type right here is called a control firing area. Think about this. Think about the name of it. Controlled firing area, okay? That's going to have, again, hazardous activity to non-participating aircraft. Here's the kick with this one. This one is designed so that if there is activity going on in there and there's an aircraft that is spotted, then the firing is going to stop. the activity inside of the CFA is going to stop. Now here's the trick. This was designed for, they have spotters, they have people that are going to be looking for other traffic, and if traffic is seen in the area, then they're going to stop flying. I don't know how that's going to work for drones, quite frankly, because that's going to be harder to see for spotters. So the bottom line is, though, these are not charted because they have spotters on the ground. They're looking for traffic. Then you won't see them. These are kind of floating areas. So you'll never know that there is a control firing area. But just so you know, this is an area that does exist. The last stretch, we talked about control, uncontrolled, special use airspace. This is the last type of airspace, if you want. It's called other airspace. And there's a lot of different other airspace. All of these right here, and then all of these right here. We're going to talk about every single one of them. Now you start to realize why this chapter is so important. There's a lot of different types of airspace. There's a lot of different ways that you can get in trouble if you don't pay attention to where you are in the airspace. So let's get started. TFRs, temporary flight restriction. This is not something that you want to bust. This is not something that you want to be flying into. Like it says in the title, it's temporary. It's like a flight restriction. It's like a restricted airspace, but it's temporary and it's going to be established in different areas depending on different things. It can be put in place to protect people and property if there is a hazard. Let's say that there was just a hurricane, for example. Then there's going to be a TFR right on top of the area that was devastated. We had wildfires in California not too long ago. Well, this is also something where we have a TFR right after a wildfire so that we can help the search and rescue people to operate safely without having to worry about civilian traffic. So that's going to be an example of a TFR. Another example is going to be in case there is an accident or an incident, a major incident that has a lot of public interest. Then to prevent people from flying over and get too curious, then they're going to basically block off the area. Think about a crime scene, for example, and then they have roped off so people don't go into the crime scene. Well, this would be the same thing just for a major event. So that's a TFR right here. Another thing too would be when the president or the VP or any kind of public figure is traveling, then we're going to have a TFR in effect. This is called VIP TFR, and you'll see them. They're actually floating. So when the president, for example, is traveling, there's a floating TFR that goes with him, and there's no flying around that whole area the entire time. One last reason for having a TFR could be for space activity. So like I said before, when I was flying in Melbourne, Florida, by the Cape, we had TFRs from time to time when the shuttle would go off. And actually the TFR was kind of funny because it cut the airport in half. So you had one section where you could fly on the airport, and then the other section you couldn't. So anyways, This is TFR. You can't fly in there. There's no possible way you can fly. These are going to be issued by NOTAMs. So you have to check ahead of time to make sure that you know if there's a TFR going on. There's a website you can go, tfr.faa.gov, and you'll find the most up-to-date list. Another good way to do this is to call 1-800-WEATHER-WX-BRIEF. 1-800-WX-BRIEF, and you'll get a briefing from an actual live person. You can also go on 1-800-WEATHERBRIEF.com, and then you'll see you can enter a whole bunch of data and it's going to spit you a brief on the computer. So there's a lot of different ways that you can do this. Make sure you get the information on TFRs. If you get found busting a TFR, you'll get in a lot of trouble, so don't do that. These obviously are not going to be depicted on the sectional charts because there is no way to put those on the map ahead of time because we don't really know ahead of time where they're going to be. Two different types of TFRs that I want to talk about more specifically because these are what's going to get you as a drone pilot. The first one is called a stadium TFR. And a stadium TFR is a TFR that's put around stadiums during certain type of games or certain type of sporting events. If you want more information on this, there's a NOTAM that's been issued just for this. It's called FDC 7-4319. If you want to read the full NOTAM, but this is what the NOTAM is saying. The TFR is 3 nautical miles in radius and up to 3,000 feet AGL, above ground level, 1 hour before the event, 1 hour after the event. This is when the stadium TFR is going to be. This is going to apply to any stadium with a seat capacity of 30,000 seats or more. So not all stadiums are going to be falling in this TFR. And these are going to apply to a whole bunch of different sports: MLB, NFL, NCAA Division I football, NASCAR, Indy, and championship in the motor racing. Be very careful with this. I know there are airspace apps that you can have out there that will tell you some of the TFRs. One famous one is AirMap. I do not recommend that you use AirMap for a lot of reasons, but one of the reasons is because they're notorious for not showing these TFRs, these stadium TFRs, or for showing too many of them, in which case you have a false positive where you could actually have flown and they're telling you that you can't. So be careful with this. First off, don't use AirMap and use other sources in order to get those stadium TFRs. If it's a big game, if it's an MLB, NFL game, just stay away from it. If it's the Super Bowl, don't be those idiots that are going to be on TV flying your drone over the Super Bowl stadium. That does no good for anyone, especially not for the industry. Another TFR I want to talk about, which is very specific, is the Disney TFR. Now, interestingly, Disney has, and this is going to sound funny, a permanent temporary flight restriction. Now, temporary flight restriction by definition is only for a certain amount of time, while Disney has had one for a long time, pretty much since 9/11. And you'll see them. There's a theme park in Orlando. There's a theme park in California. And you'll see right here, this is the example of the one in Orlando. There is a information on the panel, and it basically says that below 3,000 feet AGL and within 3 nautical miles of the theme park, you cannot fly. Don't fly your drone over Disney. That can get you in hot trouble with the FAA. In California, it's going to be the same. You have Disneyland right here. And again, it says the same thing on a little insert. It says 3 nautical miles of the theme park, and then you have here the GPS coordinates. I know you don't know how to read GPS coordinates just yet. I'm going to show that to you in the next presentation on charts. An area that you want to stay away from that you don't necessarily have to by regulation is the parachute jumping areas. And these are going to be depicted on the chart using the little parachute like this. And obviously, this is something that you want to stay away from because we don't need to be flying drones around people with parachutes. We have plenty of other places we can do that. It can be extremely dangerous if it gets tangled up in the ropes, could kill someone. Last thing we want to do is be in the news for that, or for killing someone, quite frankly. You can find more information about these in the chart supplement. You can also contact the airport to find out if the area is going to be active. Again, if it's active, just try to stay away from it. Very difficult to see skydivers, and very difficult to see when they're going to open their parachute, and very difficult to find out where they're going to go. It's not really, I mean, it's organized if you know what they're doing, but if you don't, then it can be very hectic. Something we need to talk about, we talked about military operating areas. We need to talk about military training routes. Now, MTRs, military training routes, are going to be specific routes. Think about highways that the military aircraft are going to be using for different things, for proficiency or for tactical flying. These are established below 1,500 feet. Some of them can be established below 1,500 feet above ground level, and they can be either VFR or they can be IFR. The reason I'm mentioning this is because there is a chance that you could end up being on the military training route and flying with other aircraft, military aircraft, including helicopters, flying at very low altitude, and that can be dangerous for you. These are going to be identified on the chart as VR, VFR routes, or IR, IFR routes. For you, it doesn't matter, okay? It doesn't matter if it's VFR or IFR. They could be in there flying close to you. There's going to be a 3-digit or 4-digit identifier in the back of that VR and IR. The 3-digit means that the routes are above 1,500 feet AGL. The 4-digit means that you're below 1,500 feet AGL. So you want to pay attention to those. If it says 4-digit and you're going to be flying really near to one of those, pay extra attention. Here's an example of depictions. You can see VR 1066 in the top. You can see a VR of 1003, 1002. You have all different types of routes right in here. Again, 4-digit, what we really want to pay attention to. The deeper we go into this presentation, the more rare these airspace are going to be. But again, if you're going to be flying near them, you need to understand what it entails. Special military activity. This is an area that's going to have military unmanned aircraft systems flying. Military UAS. Now, I don't know if you've ever seen a military drone. It's pretty big. Some of them are as big as actual airplane. So these are usually going to be followed by manned aircraft flying at pretty fast speed, something that you want to stay away from. This is the symbol that you're going to see. Again, these are fairly rare. There's one of them I'm going to show you in Florida. I haven't really seen any other ones, but I'm sure they're out there. This is going to have information just like for other airspace. The bottom number is the base of the airspace. The top number is the top of the airspace. And then either AGL or MSL. If it doesn't say anything, it's MSL. If it says something, it's AGL. Here's an example right here where we have this whole section, and see it starts at 500 feet AGL. 500 feet AGL. That doesn't give you a whole lot of clearance. Now, it doesn't mean you can't fly in that area. It just means that you should pay extra attention. Let's go ahead and talk about VFR routes. VFR, visual flight rules, routes are going to be designed to create a transition around, under, or through some complex airspace. Think about every city, every major city in the US has a beltway, right? It has a road that goes around the city so you don't have to go through downtown and be stuck in traffic. Well, this is kind of the equivalent right here with the VFR route, except instead of going around, we basically just go straight through, and because it's easier, because we actually can go straight through the VFR, through the airspace, because we're in 3D. There's two different types of VFR routes, what we call VFR flyways, and then Class B VFR transition areas. Now, the reason I'm showing you this may seem like an overstretch. The reason I'm covering it is because it exists out there, and if you ever see it, I want you to know that it does exist and what it is. And then the reason I'm showing you this is if you're flying in Class B airspace, you need to understand what these routes are, because there's going to be a higher volume of traffic in those areas. So that's the reason why I'm covering this. This is a VFR flyway right here, and these are actually can be found right here. You can see the blue line, and it shows you 5,500 feet or below, 5,500 feet or below. So that means that there could be traffic in here, and it's more like a corridor. Again, think about it as like a beltway, okay? So I found this information actually on a different type of chart. It's not a sectional chart. It's called a terminal area chart, which is a zoomed in version. We'll talk about that when we get to the chart section. The other type is called the Class B VFR transition area, and it's these arrows that you see on the side here, these purple or magenta arrows. And these are also going to be located on the terminal area chart, and you'll be able to find them. So if you fly in that area, you can read the terminal area chart using SkyVector for free. So I recommend that you go take a look at that if you're planning to fly in busy airspace. This should be part of your pre-flight briefing. Here's an important one that not many people know about. National Security Areas, NSAs. Can you imagine what goes on in here? Well, this is going to be an area that has requirement for increased security. Think about, I don't even have a good example, quite frankly, but think about a military facility maybe that we don't want people flying around. Now, flight in the NSA may be temporarily prohibited using a NOTAM, but in most cases, they're actually going to ask you to voluntarily fly around the area. Now, this sounds like a very interesting thing, right? This is national security, yet we're asking people to voluntarily fly away from the area. So there's no requirement. My requirement will be to not fly there unless I have a mission for someone, in which case I'm going to ask approval. I'm going to talk to people first, but just try to stay away from these areas. Just again, to keep us, keep the good reputation of drone pilots, and God knows we need it. Here's an example right here. It says, notice it says, for reason of national security, pilots are requested to avoid flight at or below 2,900 feet MSL in this area. Just don't go flying your drone in that area. Here's another one called Flight Restricted Zone, FRZs. These are established around the Capitol and around the White House. Guess what? Can't fly there, and which makes sense, right? These are very simple flight restriction zones. You can see them right here. It says flight restriction zone, and it's this big whole area right here. There's no flying in here. All right. Which takes me to the next thing, which is called the ADIZ. The ADIZ is the Air Defense Identification Zone. This is the border. This is the border around the country. It's a border up in the air. Before you leave the country, before you enter the country, you have to identify yourself going through the ADIZ. And there's a lot of different requirements to go through it. I don't recommend that you fly your drone from around the border, especially around the southern border of the country. There's a lot of agents that are looking for drug transfer from one border to the next. So if you're going to be crossing the border using a drone, that's going to look extremely suspicious. There are some ADIZ around the borders, around the land borders, and also around the water on the east side and the west side of the country. So there's lines everywhere. There's the ADIZ right here, contiguous US ADIZ on the Florida side, and then here's the one on the Arizona side. So just a line, just a border, fake line if you want, like a imaginary line if you want, but you still need to get approval to go across that. This takes me to this very specific flight area right here, which is called a Special Flight Rules Area, SFRA. There's only a few of them in the country. There's maybe like a handful, like less than 10. And these are areas where normal regulation of flight do not apply. These are very rare. There's going to be one in Washington, D.C., as you can imagine, very sensitive there. There's going to be one in L.A. because it's a really big town. There's going to be one over the Hudson because there's a lot of traffic there. There's one in the Grand Canyon because the Grand Canyon is regulated that way. And then there's one over Luke Air Force Base, okay? These areas are pretty complex because each of them has a different requirement for flying in. So if you're going to be flying in one of these, I'm going to show you how to identify them on the chart. You need to do some research. I'm not going to cover each of them individually. The one in DC has special rules for drones. You have to follow, you have to get some kind of training. And then I know I talked about it, I talked the Luke Air Force Base one. I talked about it with one of the students in this class. We went back and forth. And the bottom line is you need to call them in order to get more information about flying there. So be careful. This is the one in Luke, for example. Here's what it looks like. It's kind of like the hairline that we've seen before, but it's more spaced out. And you notice what it says on the side. It says pilots are required to establish two-way communication with Luke Air Force Base. Now, in this case, you're not going to be doing this because you're in a drone. You're not allowed to contact anyone on the radio. But essentially, there's a phone number that you can call and then get some special permission. Here's the one around DC, and if you actually see the detail right here, it says to see the description in the Atlantic Ocean. If you go in the Atlantic Ocean, there's this whole text right here. I'll let you read it if you're interested in it, but basically it goes over every requirement to be flying in that area. Now, the one in DC is very specific. If you're actually going to be flying a manned aircraft in there, you need to do a special course with the FAA before you can get in there, which is pretty intense. Let's go ahead and talk about wilderness areas and national parks. Guess what? you are not allowed to fly the drone in wilderness areas and in national parks. These areas have been set up to protect the wildlife and also to prevent unwanted noise from people that are in there enjoying nature. Manned aircraft are requested to fly above 2,000 feet AGL. For you, because you're flying a drone, and a drone is considered a motorized vehicle, there is no motorized vehicle allowed in wilderness areas and in parks. You will get fined if you fly in those areas. The fines are pretty expensive, and it just gives everybody a bad reputation. Please respect nature, please respect wildlife, please respect other people that are enjoying nature. Don't go flying out there and giving everybody a bad reputation. This is an example right here around Sedona. We have the Sycamore Canyon Wilderness area, which is pretty extensive. You will see it with that solid blue line and a little dot on the inside. The inside is where the area is located. Just don't fly in there. It's really that simple. You can fly everywhere else around it. Now, some people are going to say, well, they don't control the airspace. You can fly from the outside and go into the wilderness area. Just don't do it. There's no reason to do this. You can get great shots from these areas, especially in Sedona. I've flown in Sedona before, staying away from the wilderness area. Don't try to find a loophole and again, make every single one of us look like an idiot because you're flying in an area that you're not supposed to. Just respect it. And I'm really serious about this. So here's another example right here. This is in Key Biscayne by Miami. You can see the little dots in here. There's wildlife in there. You don't want to mess with the wildlife. There's going to be birds that are going to be flying that could be disturbed. It just doesn't make sense. This is the special flight rule area for the Grand Canyon, but you also see that the Grand Canyon is a national park. So in this case, this is a kind of a double restriction right here. You can't fly inside of the Grand Canyon with the drone, and you can't fly in national parks with the drone. Same reason as the wilderness area. So stay away from those and just enjoy nature from the ground, or get a really long stick and then put a camera on it. The last thing I want to talk about here is tethered balloons. Tethered balloons are going to be meteorological balloons that are going to be attached to a very long cable. Now there's an example in Key West right here, and that has actually a restricted area around it, 2916, and it says caution, unmarked balloon on cable to 14,000 feet MSL. 14,000 feet MSL, it's pretty tall. I actually read an article not too long ago that somebody hit that cable and it basically destroyed the airplane, killed everybody on board because they went flying in that area. You can't see the cable. I'm sure the cable is massive, but in reference to how big it is compared to the open space around it, it's not very visible. So don't go flying in there. Again, this is a restricted area, plus it has a cable that you can get that you can go hitting, which is not a good idea. Yay, we were done with airspace. I know this took a long time. There's a lot of information about airspace. Let's talk about some typical FAA questions, and then you can go and practice on the quiz and then move on to the next chapter, which is charts. Take a break first, get a glass of water or something, clear up your mind if you're doing this back to back. This is a lot of information. Make sure that you're comfortable with this section of airspace before you move on to the charts. First question, when the control tower located at an airport within Class D ceases operation for the day, what happens to the airport designation? This was part of the slides. I talk about it. When it's D and it's partial operation, when it stops, it goes into a Class E airspace. Lateral dimension of Class D are based on what? If you remember, the Class D is actually not a standard width, it's not a standard lateral boundaries. It's all based on the instrument approach at that specific airport. How would a remote PIC check NOTAMs as noted in the cautious box regarding the unmarked balloon? Now here's the unmarked balloon right here, here's the box. And how you're going to do this? Well, you're going to go in here and you're going to check either online or using a phone, getting a briefing from the briefer. But 1-800-weatherbrief.com is going to give you the NOTAMs. By the way, in here it says answer A, by utilizing the Before-You-Fly mobile app. I do not recommend you use the Before-You-Fly mobile app. I've seen many errors in that app when I used it. It's kind of useless. There is much better. Kitty Hawk is a lot better than using that Before-You-Fly thing. Here's a figure right here. The Nalf Fentress airport is in what type of airspace? Now you're going to see a ton of questions like this in the test and in the practice as well. Make sure you know how to read these charts. Nalf Fentress, let's take a look right here. Here's the airport right down here. And you notice I highlighted that little area, and that's going to be a Class E. Class E starting at, that's right, starting at the surface. So here, Class E, and then it doesn't really say at the surface, but Class E starting at the surface. According to 14 CFR Part 107, the remote pilot in command of a small unmanned aircraft planning to operate in Class C needs to do what? This is exactly what I was talking about when I gave you the slides of real life versus the test. The test right here is required to receive ATC authorization is the proper answer. In real life, you would need to go on either the FAA website or go on to LANC, which is the equivalent of getting an FAA authorization, not just ATC. The base of Class B at Lakeview 30 Foxtrot Airport in Area 2. Let's go ahead and take a look at that. 30 Foxtrot, this is the airport right here. If we look at it right here, the Class B is that blue circle around it. And you can see that it's going to be starting at 3,000 feet all the way to 11,000 feet. This is all MSL, mean sea level. So right here, 3,000 feet, and then it doesn't really say mean sea level, but it is mean sea level. The airspace directly overlying Fort Worth Meckham is what? Directly over 3,000. You can see that it's going to be starting at 3,000 feet all the way to 11,000 feet. This is all MSL, mean sea level. So right here, 3,000 feet, and then it doesn't really say mean sea level, but it is mean sea level. The airspace directly overlying Fort Worth Meckham is what? Directly overlying, directly on top of the airport. Let's take a look at this. Here's the airport. But by the way, you have to find the airport, which sometimes is half the battle right here. And you notice that it says it's in the Class D because we see the dash line. And in this case, it's going to be Class E and then all the way to 3,200 feet. So here, Class D, airspace to 3,200 feet, MSL, always. Identify the airspace over Bryn Airport. Bryn Airport, let's go ahead and try to find it in here. Okay, so Bryn Airport is located right here. Now what we notice with this airport is that it's inside of what looks like probably a military operating area. I would have to zoom out to see, but in terms of controlled or uncontrolled airspace, it's pretty straightforward here. So let's take a look. It says Class Golf airspace from the surface up to, but not including 1,200 feet AGL, and in Class E starting at 1,200 feet AGL, to, but not including. I would have to zoom out to see, but in terms of controlled or uncontrolled airspace, it's pretty straightforward here. So let's take a look. It says Class Golf airspace from the surface up to, but not including 1,200 feet AGL, and in Class E starting at 1,200 feet AGL, to, but not including 18,000 feet, which is where Class A starts. So A is the correct answer. B, it says Class Golf from surface up to 18,000 feet. That's not true. There's Class E somewhere in there. And then it says class for answer C. It says Class Golf surface up to, not including 700 feet. That's not true. If we go back to the figure, you can see there is no shaded magenta around that airport. So that would be an indication of Class E starting at 700. What is the dotted outline area northeast of Gila Bend Airport in Area 3? Let's go ahead and take a look at that. The area is that area right here. Now, if you remember, that was at the end of the presentation. That was a wildlife area, a wilderness area. The chart shows a gray line with VR 1667, VR 1617, and so on and so forth. Could this area present a hazard to the operation of a small UA? Yes, absolutely. And the reason is because this is you can see them right here, okay? And the reason is because these are going to be military training route, MTRs, from the surface to 1,500 feet AGL or below. So in this case, they could be where you are flying. You have been hired by a farmer to use your small unmanned aircraft to inspect his crops. The area that you are to survey is in Devil's Lake West MOA, east of Area 2. How would you find if the MOA is active? Well, we don't really need to take a look at the chart in this case. We know that we can look at the legend and we can find the special use airspace and find the phone number of who is basically in charge of that airspace. So A would be the answer. This is it. We're done with airspace. Please go ahead and take the quiz and then move on to the chart section where we're going to go ahead and look at more details about the charts and find out exactly how to read the charts and how to find a lot more information and also how to read GPS coordinates. So I'll see you there. Let's do a quick review of airspace. And I want to give you a quick review of controlled airspace and uncontrolled airspace, and also, well, actually just controlled airspace because uncontrolled is not depicted on the chart. And then we'll take a look at special use airspace and other airspace in here. So Class B airspace, remember, it's the blue color right here. And then this is going to show you the different elevations at 8,000 feet to 9,000 feet, 7,000 feet to 9,000 feet, and so on and so forth. So Class B airspace right here. Class C is going to be the solid magenta. Again, the same information is available, 1,200 feet to 4,000 feet, surface to 4,000 feet. Again, it depends on, this is all mean sea level numbers. This is Norfolk, Virginia, so this is going to be at sea level or close to it. So in this case, the mean sea level numbers are close to the AGL numbers. Then we have Class D airspace, Class D with the dash dotted blue line, and it's going to show you here the top, again in mean sea level, so 2,500 feet in this case. Then we have the Class E airspace, which can be depicted a lot of different ways. Class E starting at 1,200 feet. And then we have Class E starting at the surface, which is going to be that dash magenta line. And then we have Class E starting at 700 feet, which is going to be depicted with that shaded magenta colored line right here. Again, Class E starting at 700 feet. Class E starting at any altitude, which is based on the zipper lines like we have right here. Then we move on to the special use airspace and the other airspace. Now you notice that some of them share the same color marking, except they have a different letter in front of it. So for example, prohibited, restricted, and warning areas are all going to be using that comb looking blue line right here. So prohibited area looks like this, pretty rare for prohibited areas. Then we have the restricted area with an R in front of it. And finally, we have the warning area, which is going to be with a W off the coast of the country. Then we have the alert area and the military operating areas. These are going to be the same shape, but a magenta color. So alert area for concentrated flight training. And then here we have the military operating areas. Then we have the SFR, the special flight rule areas, which are depicted like this. It's kind of the same symbol, but more spaced out. Again, if you remember from the previous slides, this is going to be pretty rare, very uncommon to find some of these. This is the one that's going to be around the Phoenix area with the Air Force Base. And just so you know, this is where it's located, Luke Air Force Base, and just know how to find information about each of these specifically. Let's do a quick review of airspace. of airspace. And I want to give you a quick review of controlled airspace and uncontrolled airspace, and also, well, actually